What's up, everybody, and welcome to another episode of the Abundance Podcast. So, here with us today, we have Rodney Gagnon, a very special guest. So, Rod is a private investigator, and he is the co founder of the GLC Investment Fund, an investment fund that goes after white collar criminals. So, what's up, Rod? How are you?
Hi, good morning. It's good to be here.
Yeah, thank you for coming in. So, why don't you start by telling us a little bit about yourself and your investment fund?
Sure. I have been an investigator for more than 47 years. I basically started right out of high school. I started a repossession company and did that for about 8 years. And I did a lot of my foundational learning repossessing cars because it wasn't necessarily just we didn't have any tow trucks, so it was not finding a car and towing it or something. It was we went after all the people that the tow truck guys couldn't find. So it was field work, interviewing people, tracking down clues, that kind of stuff. And this was back in the mid to late '80s, and it was a phenomenal learning experience for a baby investigator back then. A lot of field work. A lot of different types of personalities, a lot of situations that you had to learn to be able to deal with on the fly. So I did that. That was foundational. And now over the years, I've done lots of different financial investigations and fraud investigations. And what I do now is mostly post judgment investigations work, where our fund buys a judgment or a pool of judgments, and with those comes some liens and some claims, or they turn into liens and claims. And we use the same investigative stuff that we use on the other side of the house when I was working with law firms and plaintiffs and judgment creditors to track down the money that was hidden and be able to get it back. So we've taken what was part of the regular investigative business, and now we're doing it privately. That's really what we're doing. So our fund, the JLC Income Fund, which stands for Judgment, Liens, and Claims, is exactly that. We focus on just those kind of assets. We track down mostly wealthy people who've made personal guarantees but have decided they're not going to pay, and we are balancing it back out by doing the recovery for
Mm-hmm.
them. So it is probably a little messier than most funds, a lot more fun than I think most other funds, and our yield is much higher than a lot of other funds.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So for those of you listening that are not familiar with what you're doing and that didn't listen to the podcast I did with your partner Warren Ross, can you tell us like a brief overview of what your fund is doing for someone who has never heard about it?
Sure. I mean, there are a lot of people that don't know what a judgment is only because they've never had to sue anybody or they haven't been sued, and that's fair. So what happened typically for us is somebody sues somebody generally because of default of contract or something, or they owe them for some particular situation, and they fight the good battle with the attorneys, and the attorneys do a great job of getting a judgment award where the judge comes down and says you're owed X amount of dollars, and that's pretty much where most of it stops for at least in the U.S. legal system and a lot of other countries. There is a problem where after the judgment is awarded, that they think, okay, I'm going to get paid now, and they wait a while, and then they talk to their attorney and say, okay, when am I getting the money? And they go, well, that's totally different. You probably have to hire a PI. And that's where the problems start because if they don't work out right away and and pay it off, it gets harder and harder. The hardest people to collect from and to get the assets from are the ones that have fought all the way to the end, fought past judgment, and say, "Yeah, I'm not going to pay you." So that's where we come in. We come in and we buy those generally after from somebody who is exhausted from the litigation and has no idea how to do it. And then we come in with all our tools and handle the recovery side of it. Our recovery rate is much higher. It's
Mm-hmm.
closer to 80 to 85%. Whereas with regular people, 80% of the judgments are never collected. So we're in the right place at the right time with the right tools.
Mm-hmm. All right. So yeah, I think you explained it pretty well. So basically, when you sue someone and then you lose, while the person won, so you owe him money, but then he's not paying, so he has a debt to you for, let's say, $300,000. Now you But he's not paying it, so you come in, you buy the debt as pennies on the dollar, and then you enforce the person to actually pay you once you own the debt. So then, how do you filter the good debts to buy? How do you filter the good judgments to buy, right? Because you cannot just, sometimes maybe he really doesn't have the money. Sometimes it's might be too well hidden for you to find. So what is kind of your first step in the process, right? How do you choose which judgments to acquire?
That's actually a great question because for us, uh, that is key, right? Starting at the beginning, very much like real estate. I've heard some of the real estate guys say the money is made on the buy.
Mm-hmm.
For us, it's the exact same thing. So when we go through a group of them that we're taking a look at, we have a protocol we have to take a look at from our side before we'll make an offer. We're not gonna buy everyone that comes through the door, right? So if I'm taking a look at you, start at the beginning. Are you still alive? And did you file bankruptcy, right? Are you living under a bridge somewhere? What kind of assets you have? So there's an initial view of the status and situation to make sure it's a viable thing. Because once we commit to going after somebody, there's legal costs, and it may last years. Investigative costs, um, time. So we can't work on anything that's too small, and we can't work on anything that's going to end up being an overcommitment. So
Mm-hmm.
that is a crucial part, and I think everybody has their own protocol for doing that. And what's interesting is even with that, it doesn't. There are opportunities within there, right? So, for example, if it turns out the debtor died, right? It doesn't
The what? The
mean
debt?
if the debtor died, the
Oh, the
judgment
debtor
debtor,
die. Okay, yeah.
yeah, the debtor judgment debtor died. There are sometimes if you catch it early enough, you can submit a claim to the court, to probate court, right? The estate to get paid. And we've got one of our largest settlements last year was from one of those where the debtor had died. I don't know if he died from COVID or what happened. He just disappeared. We got contacted by the estate. Um, and sometimes in bankruptcy, if we catch it soon enough, we get that window, right?
Mm-hmm.
We can submit a claim. And I think the only downside with the work we do is we have all these paths of opportunity, but they all take time. And unlike real estate, especially crypto goes at the speed of light, right? Ours is much more plodding, much more patient. Um, the good news is, the inventory is there. The yield is fantastic, but the one downside is the time. Courts go at a certain speed, and we can only go as fast as they go.
Mm-hmm.
So during COVID, the courts were closed for a while, which made it very difficult for us. We did use the time to get more inventory, buy really good inventory, and get all set up for coming out of it, but it got even slower. So that is the first step is to find out, is it viable, and we have our own scoring on it based upon what assets they own. Are they in trust? What kind of trust? I mean, there's a lot of research that goes into it, which just like real estate, same thing. The better the research, the better the yield, right?
Yeah. So if I understood you correctly, your like target audience, like your avatar would be some wealthy individual who have assets, who is still alive, and who is doing well financially, but for some reason, like he's just not paying the debt, so he's hiding money somewhere.
Correct, right, and it's a little different. What we do is a little different from when you bring an investigator in, a private investigator. Let's say you hired a PI to help you out. You had a judgment, $1 million judgment, and what people will do is go to their attorney and say, "What do I do? He's not paying, or she's not paying, or the company's not paying, whoever the debtor is, right? They're not paying. What do I do? Well, hire a private investigator. Or let's go get the information." The main weakness of that is private investigators do what I call a siloed investigation, right? It's what did you own? What do you own today? What kind of cars you own? What kind of real estate do you own? Do you own a business? What do you do for a job? It's today, right? The problem with that kind of research is um, a very clever strategic non-payer, right, is going to have set it up so when we get to that point, they look like they're judgment proof, right, and that there's nothing there. So, and what we do is more along the lines of financial forensic analysis, right? Is timeline based. What did you do when you knew you weren't going to be able to pay? So you have a choice. Let's say you owe a million and you have a million and you don't have any more money coming in. Well, some of them will look at this and go, well, I'm not going to pay them. I'm going to keep the money because I need to use it for something else. Or, yeah, I'm not going to pay them off because then what am I going to have? Right. So some of them have that decision point, and that's when the planning starts. They start transferring the boat to the brother, right? The cabin goes to the mother-in-law. The business is sold, right? And all this is done well in advance. So by the time you get down to the judgment award, suddenly they have no assets, right? So for us, it's timeline based. Uh, the good news is the courts have things set up for help us be able to reverse some of that, what they call voidable transfers, right? For us to go into the court and say, Your Honor, isn't this really interesting? We went after Alexis and he had a beautiful cabin up in the mountains here in Denver. And strange that the day after he got served with a complaint, it was sold to his brother for $1. Isn't that weird? And the judge goes, "Yeah, we're going to reverse that." So it's more interesting along those lines, and I think that's why we're more successful. Is we do those timeline based analysis, whereas other people can run out and they hire an investigator. The investigator does a good job, but they can't see the transfers. And that's what it's all about. It's a game of chess. That's what it comes down to. What did they do? What did they think they were going to do? And could we find out what they did and reverse it?
And so why does a classic private investigator doesn't look at the whole history of the person and only look at how much money he has today? Like what's the reason that you're able to look at his past and history, but that they don't do it?
Well, because the average private investigator, if you are doing all that work that's before the judgment is awarded, right? So they get hired at the very beginning to find out, does this debtor have any assets, right? They get hired to find out where are they located so they can have them served, or where do they work so they can have them served. So they do interviews. So maybe go out and do interviews for an accident, and their whole world is interviews and maybe background checks for employment or for whatever. Occasionally, they'll do asset checks. What do they own for cars? So all that is like prejudgment. So, and it's a pretty wide range. With ours, it's very, very specific. Our job is to follow money from here to Hong Kong and back, right? Where did it go? Where's the boat? Where's the yacht right now? Is it in Belize? Is it in Panama? Where is this stuff? And that's not really a world that most investigators have the tools for, and they don't have the legal knowledge, right? So with a financial forensic analyst has to know the legal knowledge that the lawyers have, as well as the investigative knowledge, and be able to put the two together. The average PI, they don't need to have all that language other than within their specific field. So it's I know a lot of great investigators, phenomenal at what they do, but they're not a specialist in this. So them getting pulled into a case like this to do their work, they don't have the tools that we have.
Mm-hmm. Right. So can you take us to one case study, right? One real time case study, if you can. I don't know how much confidential that is, but you can share as much detail as you're comfortable with. But can you like take us from A to Z to a real case study that you bought a judgment and you succeed into finding the money?
Sure. I mean, I've got a lot of ours are actually public record. So unlike the investigative world, where like let's say repossessions, right? When I did repossessions, I could tell very limited stories because I couldn't do anything that invaded somebody's privacy, because it was generally a consumer transaction, and I could tell some funny stuff, but very specific stuff I couldn't get into. Our stuff, almost all of it, is in the court. You could go in there, you can see all the filings, you could see all the depositions, you could see all the stuff in there. So it makes it a lot more fun for me because I can tell most of my stories up there. So there are so many varied stories, and they're so fun, and they're so shifting that it keeps it interesting. But one of the ones that I can give would be a great example. Would be uh, it was a person out of Florida, and it's key. Florida. I'm going to use Florida specifically for this example because Florida has 100% homestead, right? That means if you own a house in Florida with 100% homestead, I can't go after your house. Doesn't matter if it's $1 million house. the if you live there, and it's in a state like Texas or Florida, as a creditor, can't go and force the sale and take that equity, right? Florida says you can go after other stuff, you just can't go after the house. So this particular debtor was in Florida. Um, it was really interesting because at the time we couldn't really. She stole, I think it was $2 million that she stole. I mean, just flat out, just stole it, and then they went and they got the judgment against her. And when we started to unravel this whole thing, it was great learning event, right? Because she had a Lamborghini, she had a Mercedes that she bought, right, with the money. And it took us a while to unwind it. One of the things we noticed, like one of the things we do is we take a look at the credit reports, right? And we break apart a credit report for everything. It's not just um, how good is your credit? The question is, do you own a house? Because you'll see the mortgages on there, right? And how what the balance is of that mortgage. And now you can do an equity analysis because you can say, hey, a Zillow, a Redfin, or whatever, somebody out there comes up with a value of the house, subtract the balance. Now you minus whatever exemptions they have, and now I know how much is in that house. Well, Florida, that doesn't help me, right? Because it has 100% homestead. Doesn't matter what her balance is. Um, and there's other parts of that we break apart. Inquiries, auto loans. Let's say I think you have two cars, but your credit report shows you have four active loans. Well, that means there's two cars someplace else, right? Maybe you signed one for the wife or for the kid. So we always pull those. Well, when we pulled hers, it looked fine, but it took me a minute, and then I realized when I was going through highlighting everything, her balances were zero, right? So in other words, she stole the money. She bought a Lamborghini. She bought a Mercedes Benz. She paid off her all her debt. She paid it all off, so she was debt free, right? Including her house was now paid off. Well, that created an opportunity where we went back into the court and we said, Your Honor, we know Florida's got 100% homestead, but you can't rob a bank and then go and keep the money and pay off your loan in Florida and go, oh, that's homesteaded, right? That's what do they call that? Bad fruit. I can remember how the terminology goes. Um, so we were able to go into court and be able to say we'd like to sell the house, right? To get the equity out of it because she took stolen money. She paid off the mortgage. Our money is in the house, and we got approved for that,
So
right? So
sorry,
what?
so who sued her? And like they sued her for having stolen $2 million, and how much was the judgment for?
Yeah, it was 2 million. It was
Two
a, it
million.
was a
Okay.
contract for a project, and she got control of the money, and then she just emptied the bank accounts and walked away.
Okay,
So
so
the ju-
it was a
yes,
company that sued her.
right, right.
Okay.
And then they went and they got the judgment against her for 2 million.
Mm-hmm.
Right? And that's where we stepped in and started to figure out they're like, we can't find any money. She doesn't have any money. And then we started to peel the onion on this and started realizing first, house is paid off, and surprise, we may have a path to get to the house.
Mm-hmm.
Because, like I said, if you could prove to the judge that there's an event here, we could do something, right? The next thing was the cars. The cars had all been sold, right? But when we pulled all the title work from the state, the car was gifted. The Lamborghini was gifted to a young lady, um, and we tracked her down and found out that she was actually the daughter that she was gifted all the cars, right, in the title paperwork, and it said right on it was like handwritten notes on the title and stuff like, um delete contact name and that kind of stuff. So when they entered it in and got the plates, they're gonna go in and delete a bunch of stuff for them because, "Oh, we need that for privacy purposes. We need that taken out." Because she had gone to court and got her name legally changed for abuse, and it was fascinating. I mean, she had her daughter change her name. You know what I mean? I mean, who does that, right? Well, I guess maybe if I got to keep a Lamborghini, maybe I'd talk my kids into changing their name, right? Let them drive it on weekends a little bit. So that gave us a chance to go into court and say, hey, she gifted her car to for no money to a young lady who was actually her daughter, right? And she did it after she stole the money, after the money was taken. So that's avoidable transfer. Go in there. Hey, we would like to get the cars. And that's what we did. We were able to go after Lamborghini and the Mercedes. Uh, I think we had to leave the Mercedes because most states you have to leave at least one car, right? Or there's a certain amount that they have to keep, and you can sell the car, but give them back some of the cash so they could go get a car. Society is pretty good about it. They don't let us take everything, right? They want to make sure that we don't create homeless people. There's a certain
Mhm.
exemption level that you can't take, like the car they need, right? Tools of the trade. Some of them are funny because some of the exemptions are old, right? And they haven't been updated, like a certain amount of chickens, a certain amount of pigs, So obviously, and these are more rural places, but they haven't been updated. But that for us was a perfect example because when I go to teach this, I go over and I use the credit report one as a great example, right? Like, take a look. If you read into it, it was easy to miss at first that all her balances were zero. She paid everything off. I was concentrating on, does she have a mortgage? Does she have a car? All this stuff. And it took me a while to realize, hey, there's no balances on anything. And everything was paid off right after she stole the money. So that's what we do is we have this giant list we go through of everything. Scorched earth we try to find, and not everything works because in one state I can get the house, next state I can't get the house. One
Mhm.
state I can go after certain beneficial interest, and the next state I can't. They're exempt. So
Mhm.
every state is unique. And so like I said, we look at it as a chess game, right? Where what is it that's gonna get you to the table to settle this out and take care of it?
Right.
Everybody has their Achilles heel, and that's our goal. Some people, it's their boat. Say, "I'm
Mhm.
going after your boat." Do we really want the boat? No, not really. It costs money to take the boat, store the boat, sell the boat, but I want you to think I'm going after the boat. So you go, "That's it, done. I'll pay this off." So for us, it's very, very, fun because on that side of trying to figure out what is that point that we can get them to say, "I'm done. You can have it."
What is their emotional turning point where they just give up because they're scared of losing their boat or losing their Lamborghini?
A lot of it has to do with there's a realization that we can get to them, right? So most people, if they don't pay their debt, they're not afraid of the credit card company coming over to them,
Mhm.
and violating that space, right? Uh, with us, we move the case to your state, where we're starting to take some of your things. Like if I emptied your bank account, right? Um, that's a very personal thing to realize that somebody has that kind of access. And that's where the things start changing, right? I got a great example for that, the psychological part, right? We went after a deputy clerk of court, right? So this is one of the highest people in the court that we were going after. He was not a nice guy, very devious guy. And when I would try to garnish his bank account, I noticed that I get almost nothing, right? I'd get $15. I get $7, right? And I couldn't figure out why. And then I figured out, well, the writ was coming across his desk for his own writ against his bank account, and it would have his name on it. So he'd go to lunch, he'd empty out most of his bank account, he'd come back, and he'd sign off on it, right? And it took me a while to realize he was the guy that was signing off on his own writs, right? Well, this is problematic when the person at the court is the person approving everything, and they're a powerful political figure, right? So with him, by the time we were done, we'd emptied out his house. Um, oh yeah, that's a whole other story. But the point was, at the end of it, he handed me a check for a little over $1 million at the end, and he goes, here you go. I just want to let you know something. He goes, nobody has ever got me to pay. He goes, "So, congratulations." And I'm like, part of me is like, "Yay, victory." Another part of me is like, "That's sad." That means, it shouldn't get to that point where people have to come after you like that.
Mhm. I mean, he's a white collar criminal, like your thesis said.
Exactly, and we're using the civil courts to be able to go after them, and the very tools that they hide behind, because a lot of them will go into court and bury you with lawyers and time, and money, and what we
Mhm.
do is we go in there, we play the game better.
Yeah, and I think also you kind of feel a important gap in the legal system, right? Because it shouldn't be to the individual to enforce the other person to pay their debt and to pay their judgments, right? I would assume, I mean, before I met your partner and before I met you, I just assumed that if I sued someone and I won, he will have to pay, and if he doesn't pay, he'll go to jail. I mean, that's what I thought. But then I learned talking to you and your partner that if he doesn't pay and hides the money, there's nobody to help me enforce it, and I'm the one responsible, and I'm the one responsible for paying for lawyers, responsible for paying for a private investigator to force him to pay me the money that he owed me because he did a crime. So that's is just ridiculous. So not only I think you're making money because you're buying debt for pennies on the dollar, which is awesome, but you're also, doing good deeds.
That what you brought up is a very common thing. Well, there's a lot of people that when they win, they think that a check's going to show up. Now that does work if you sue an insurance company, you sue a bank, or a large corporation, a really large corporation,
Mhm.
because most of them, their insurances basically say, "We'll cover this, but you have to go only if you lose in court and there's a judgment awarded against you. Otherwise, we're not covering it." So, as soon that's why we almost never find it, very rarely find a judgment against insurance company or a bank, and generally it's because they didn't know about it. Let's say the service went to a branch manager and the big corporation didn't know about it. Whenever we find those, as soon as they lose, they pay, right?
Mhm.
But the rest of them, the people who are not at that level, they're actually surprised where they go to their attorney and say, "Hey, where's the money?" Um, and the attorneys can be a little naive only because they don't deal with this side of everything, right? I actually had an attorney tell me, "We don't have to bring you guys in. We don't have to do any of this stuff. We're going to have a debtor's exam." And we have a debtor's exam, they're gonna be compelled to tell us the truth and to tell us where their assets are. And I was like, "Nope, that's not how it works. They're gonna get in there and they're gonna lie, right?" He goes, "No, they're gonna be compelled by the law to say that." And there's some that actually believe that. I don't understand that because, it was a TV show years ago, Doctor House, that was on TV about a doctor, and his phrase that he used all the time is, "They lie. They all lie." Right, and that's what it is with the debtor's exam. So for us, one of the signs of an attorney that doesn't really understand how the game is played, if you go to them and say, "Hey, I got to get this thing enforced. What do I do?" If their very first response is, "We're going to schedule a debtor's exam," right? As soon as they say that, you're going down the wrong path because you think about it, you don't have any intel to use for that debtor's exam, right? You've got to stop, do the research, and you do the debtor's exam last, not first, right? So if I brought you into court, right? Well, let me give you a classic example. We do it last, and now I know I've already taken what I can, and I'm to the point where I need more confirmation before I could do anything, right? So I got you up on the stand, right? And I go up, or my attorney goes up and says, "Okay, um, what do you bank?" And you go, "Oh, I don't really have anything active right now." I got like, "What? Oh, really? Because we got this stuff right here. It says, you have business accounts over Bank of America." And you go, "Oh yeah, I forgot about that. I didn't know you were talking about that. But yeah, I got Bank of America. Great, great, great. Now, do you own a boat?" "No, I don't. I don't have a boat." "Really? Because this says here you have a boat that is registered in Arizona." "Oh, oh crap. Yeah, yeah, yeah. I did that with my brother. I forgot about that. I could always consider that my brother's boat. I forgot about that." So when this is done 2 or 3 times, right? Now we get up to the question we really want to ask you, right? So I pick up a piece of paper, or they pick up a piece of paper. It depends on a small court or the court where the attorney has to represent. So the attorney picks up a piece of paper, and a lot of times it's a nothing piece of paper. And I look at it, and I look at you, look at it, and goes, "Now tell me about the money that you have offshore." Well, you just embarrassed yourself 3 or 4 times in front of the judge, right? And you go, "Well, yeah, we got a small account in Panama, but it's not anything important."
And that's what we
Okay.
wanted to know all along, but
Yeah, we had no idea where it is, but we gotta get it set up, and it's being recorded so that, if something happens down the road, you try to file bankruptcy, we can use that stuff against you. So that's what I'm talking about. It's a chess game. Every part has to be done correctly, and the average attorney is just not trained for
mhm.
that, and not even collections. They literally have to be a post-judgment, attorney that does very specific work.
And so in all of your career, as a private investigator, chasing white collar criminals, chasing unpaid judgments, cars. So, was there ever a time where you felt that your life was endangered, that you felt like threatened for your life?
Well, yes. I can I can tell you. Let me tell you a repo story because it was a long time ago, but they make for some of the more fun ones. So I got a call. We operated out of New Hampshire. We had all the finance companies and almost all the credit bureaus. I mean credit unions out of New Hampshire. But I got a call from a finance company out of Boston, which is across the border. It's about an hour south, and they called and said, "Hey, all our repo guys are busy down here. We need this one particular repo done, and we'll pay twice the amount." And I'm like, "That's very strange because I know some of the guys in Boston. They're really, really good at what they do." He goes, "Yeah, it just is not lining up, and we have a deadline, and they told us to call you." Like, this is very strange. So, sure, I'll do it. So I drove down to Boston. It was right on Tremont Street. If anybody knows where Tremont Street is, it's very well known, very wealthy street. Um, and I passed the house, and the house it's a mansion, right? And it's got that circular driveway, and it's got all these cars there. And that car, my repo, is sitting there right in front, right? Easy to get. And I'm like, and the alarm bells are going off. I should have stopped right then. I was like, this doesn't make any sense to me. So, but at the top of the stairs is this the big guy standing there in a suit, right? He's just standing there at the top, sitting at the top of the stairs. And I was much younger and I was much faster. And I was like, I'm pretty sure he can't catch me. Right. He can't catch me. First of all, I mean, he's a good 20, 30 feet away, right?
So
Uh
just that was you were refining cars, and
yeah, at the
then
time I was
so
repossessing cars.
people that are not paying their payment on cars, and then you go and you repossess the car. Is that what you were doing?
Correct. If you missed 3 payments at that time, I don't know what it is now, but it was a while back. If you missed the 3rd payment, then if they could get the car back to the dealership in time, the dealership had to pay the loan off. I can't remember what it was called, recourse or something like that.
Hmm.
So there was this time game the bank played. They would give you 1, 2, 3, you're out. Car gets pulled. Um,
Okay,
yeah,
and then your goal was to find the car, which was oftentimes hidden, and then to repossess it and to bring it back to to the dealership.
correct. Correct.
Okay,
Or a storage lot and the dealership would take it over.
all right.
Exactly. So it was a time game. So I thought the reason why they called me in was because, hey, we're running out of time, right? It's viable. Everybody else is busy. But here's the problem. I drove by and the car's right there, right? So there's no searching, there's no hunting for it. The car's right there. It was like a
Hmm.
Lincoln Town car. If you remember those, they were big cars, right? Very luxurious cars in front of a mansion. So with a guy guarding the door, right? So I ran up to the car, and this particular one, we actually had the keys. So most of them, I have to say 7 or 8 out of 10, we didn't have the keys. We had tools to be able to take the car. But this one, I actually had a set of keys. That's why I thought it would be fast enough to run up, get in the car, and get out of there before he could come down the stairs because he was a big guy. So I run up to the car and I look up to, and I get right to the door and I pause and I look up at him and he's just looking at me, right? So I just kind of waved and he takes his hand, he just kind of waves back at me, right? And I'm like, okay. So I get in the car and I drive it down the street, right? Car starts right up, drives great, and the alarm bells are going off in my head. Generally, when that happens, I go for the glove box. Generally, I'll find in there, let's say, gun or drugs or something. I reach over and open the glove box is empty. And I'm like, something's not right here. So I pull over to the side and I pop the trunk and I open the trunk. And in the trunk are big bags of white stuff and guns and rifles and shotguns and more bags of white stuff. And I went, okay. So I shut the trunk. I drove around. I did a U turn, pulled it back into the driveway, got out of the car, shut the door, and looked up at the guy. He's still there. Right. And I waved to him a little
So
bit.
why didn't he react at all?
I'm pretty sure he was mafia.
Yeah,
I'm
but why
pretty
didn't he
I
chase
I
after
don't
you?
think he
Or
was worried. I think those guys know that if you do something stupid, that you're gonna I don't know. I was not experienced in the mafia world. All I know is that, I'm bringing this car back, and now I know why nobody will touch it, right? I'm the out of town guy who doesn't know a clue what's going on. So I park it. I wave to him again. He waves back at me again, and I leave. And the bank calls me and says, "Well, the strangest thing just happened. The guy just came in and just paid the car off, cash, right? Paid the whole car off." Said his dad got mad at him because he was trying to build his credit, but his dad told him, "You don't need credit. I don't know why you're doing this." But they said, "Did you have anything to do with this?" I was like, "Nope." because we would get paid if we could initiate the settlement, right? Talk to them and get them to the point where they took it seriously. I was
Mhm.
like, nope, I never found the car. I said, never found the car. My name doesn't go into any reports. You're never going to get a report from me. And they were like, you sure? It's like, yep. I have no idea what you're talking about. I was never able to make it down there. I was going to go down there tonight. And I went, oh, okay. Well, that worked out good. So just cancel the work. So there are times where we had to make a judgment call like that. So yes, most of the time though, they know we're coming, right? You don't go to 2 years of court and pay all those legal fees and get a judgment against you, and then you're surprised. So, but yeah, sometimes we have to make a judgment call. Not that often, but in that particular case, his dad told him to go down and pay the loan off, right?
Mhm.
And I'm sure with judgments, it would be very similar. They would be told, go down and pay it off. Um, the truly powerful and wealthy don't get into those situations.
Yeah. I mean, that's a crazy story, and the part that surprises me is that they like the guy didn't even react, and they just let you took the drugs full of cocaine and guns, and then you just drove away. So.
I'm sure what probably happened was the guy told the people in the house what happened, and the father probably turned to the son and said, "Listen, you can't do it. The bank sent somebody to go get the car, and you just scared this poor kid to death, right? Get down there and pay the car off. You're gonna get some poor kid killed, right?" That's probably more likely what happened back then. All I know is, like, I didn't know much about these people, but I'm like, I'm not getting in the middle of all this.
Yeah.
So I mean, in the end, they were just cars, right? So we could say it's just not worth it. It's just a car, right? We did have situations where it was the opposite. I had one where a guy came up and was intimidating me, and I'm like, dude, it's just a car. Relax. And then I came back a couple hours later with 5 other guys and we took the car, right?
Mhm.
So there are situations where you bring, a gun to a knife fight, and there are times that you walk away and say it's not worth doing it. For us, that generally translates now into a settlement. It doesn't get anywhere near as fun as it was in the repo world. It's fun. It's much more strategic, much more on paper, much more settlement based, right? If somebody truly has some issues, they're talking to their attorneys, and the attorneys don't play that game. The attorneys are not going to threaten anybody. Well, not like that. They'll do hints, and it's much more subtle.
Mhm.
So in the end, not really. It's not really an issue, but there's nothing in our world that we can't walk away from.
Right. So what was a typical case study when you were repossessing car? Was the car just sitting somewhere in the woods, or like hidden in the mansion that they didn't declare, or like where did they hide the car and how did you find it?
Well, with repossessions, um, it was generally people who were lower middle class or poor. I mean, if they were poor, you couldn't qualify for the car. If you were lower middle class, you got impacted by any economic event, unless you got laid off or the economy went bad, or they were terrible with money. There's a lot of people that would buy a very expensive vehicle, but they were terrible with money. They'd make like one payment and that would be it. So what they would do is they would move and not leave their prior address and tell everybody, don't tell anybody where I went. Or they would take a job in California. They drive clear across the United States. Um, it was those kind of situations. The people we were up against were generally people who were driving something they shouldn't have been driving. Right now, the part that I always found interesting is they would always come after me and say, how can you do what you do? Right? How can you live with yourself? And I would look at them and say, "You're driving like an $80,000 truck," or at that time it would be more like a 50 or $60,000 truck, right? You're driving a gorgeous truck and you can't I couldn't afford this truck and I make more than you. And right next to it would be an older car. And there was several times, almost every single case, there was another car in the yard that was older. And I would say, "But what about this car?" And they go, "Well, I'm not going to drive that. That's a piece of crap." And I go, "Well, all right, so who's the bad guy here? You borrowed 60,000, made one payment, and not didn't make any. That's called stealing, right? You took a bag of cash, now it's in the form of a car. Now you're like, I don't have to pay for it. And I'm the bad guy." So there was only one situation I ran into. I put a lot of work into tracking down this car, and the situation was a woman who had a couple babies. She was living in a trailer. The electricity was shut off on the trailer. She needed the car to be able to get milk for her babies. She had run from an abusive situation, right? Which is why she had the car. And I guarantee you, nobody was ever going to find this car. Like if I decided I couldn't find the car, nobody was ever going to find it because with the luck I had in finding the right people in the right place to end up finding her was not a thing that could be duplicated, right? Um, so when I found her and I talked to her and got the whole situation, I was, and I actually called the bank and I said, having a hard time finding this car. And the bank said, it's a piece of crap anyways. It's like over 4 years. We're just going to write it off. So don't worry about it. And I was like, okay. I told the lady, don't worry about it. And I walked away. So and the bank wrote it off. Right. But most of them were not that. Most of them were people driving things they shouldn't have bought, they couldn't afford when they should have been paying for their family food and stuff. But they had too much pride, and they had another car they could drive, but they wouldn't drive. So I actually felt it's the opposite. I thought they were irresponsible, but um, it taught me a lot when I was young about human psychology.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Yeah, I guess so. I mean, I'm on your side. I don't think these guys deserve anything more than getting their car repossessed. I mean, it's the least that can happen to them. And so now, if we get back on your investment fund, what is the future for your investment fund? What is the vision, the medium and long term vision?
Well, there's for us, because we have the right skill set, because we have the right tools, for us, being able to find good quality inventory and working on it um, is a great opportunity. Right now, our business does really well. The only thing that can be better is if we can scale it. The only way we can scale it is by bringing in more investor money, be able to pick up more inventory, right? So we believe that we're coming up to another correction. We're starting to go into it now. I know there's some people that don't believe that, but it happens on a regular cycle, right? With the banks, banks will build up some bad inventory, and then it gets sold off on waves, like every, let's say, 12 to 15 years, right? We want to be in a position where when that comes and happens again, that we're in a position to be able to buy up that inventory on every correction. Um, at the last correction, I had a chance to buy a lot of great stuff, and it would have been stuff that we could have actually settled for a lot less with each of the people, and everybody would have won. We would have made a fortune. They would have settled, um, but I didn't have the capital to be able to do it. Right. So the opportunity was there, but during a bad economic time, the banks tighten up on all their availability of capital, right? So we're like, okay, how do we fix this? Well, first, we'll scale it right now and bring in some investors to share in our yield now with the inventory that we have. We're going to add on what we have, but we're getting prepared for opportunities down the road, probably 28 to 36 months. We think that's when the big opportunity, when they're going to be large portfolios will start being packaged up. We hope. And if it doesn't, that's fine. We'll go on and work the way we work and make good money. But if the opportunity does happen 2 years, 3 years from now, 10 years from now, we'll be in a position to be able to buy 100 times the inventory for the
Mhm.
same amount of money, or 10 times the inventory for the same amount of money. And everybody will do even better. So that's our main reason for doing the fund, because we didn't have to do the fund. We could have just stayed in our world. Nobody would have ever known about what we do and done really well. But um, to me, it's really an exciting idea to be able to pick up a lot more inventory and be able to properly get justice for some of these situations where people took money and don't think they ever have to give it back. And in return, the investors do well and we do well. So I think this is the right time, right? The way for us to be able to get into the funds, the timing is perfect for us.
Mhm. Yeah. So if you wanted to, let's say you raise 100 million or even more. So what infrastructures, what systems, and what kind of team do you have to build, right? So how much people and how will you approach bigger projects? So will you just buy more individual judgments, or will you go against corporation? Do you ever see yourself going after big pharmaceutical? Because I mean that's where the money can really be extravagant. So
Well, okay, so we are a little limited because we won't go after anybody, right? So we won't work on student loans. We won't buy motor vehicle debt. I mean, if it was like Porsches and Ferraris, but those get they generally don't get into trouble, right? So we won't go after auto debt because we may take your car if you have some extra cars, but I'm not going to buy a portfolio of auto debt simply because we don't want to go after middle class people, right? It's is that's not our market. That's not what we're looking for. So we won't go after medical, right? Or anything even remotely connected to that. So we stick very specifically to mostly business debt or transactions where um, the people are in a position to pay, but they won't pay. So because of that, we're a little bit more limited. I mean, there's huge amount of credit card inventory out there. There's a lot of it, right? Um, but we won't go after that. I don't need to go after credit card debt. There's great opportunity going after business situations and fixing them.
Hmm.
I don't know if that answered. Did I miss part of your question there?
No, well, you answered a part of it, but the other part was if you get really big, like what kind of team do you have to build? Like how much people per contract? Because it's not like I run a hedge fund, so a hedge fund it's we can be two people and manage over 100 million and easily, but it's a lot less passive. You have to go investigate in the field, like put yourself in the field and investigate every situation, play the game of chess for every single debt, for every single judgments you buy. So I'm having trouble seeing how you can scale to hundreds of millions of dollars if it's so and it's active for you, right? You have to have big teams. So what kind of team do you have to build, and how much employee would you need if you want to scale to hundreds of millions of dollars?
No, that's a really good question. So part of it is we have an internal system that automates a lot of the beginning part of it, so that it'll identify certain assets so we can get right over to the attorneys, right? Like, so our bulk of our work is at the very beginning to make sure that what we're buying is good. And then it's right kind of in the middle. We're trying to verify where the assets were, but at the end, everything gets pushed over to a legal team for them to run with and do the marathon, right? Because they might be in court for a year, taking things, attaching things, doing what they have to do. Our part is in the middle. So because of that, we've had to create a training institute where we train court researchers and analysts to be able to do what we do. I can't take a regular investigator and just put them to work, right? I have to be able to train somebody in house to be able to do this timeline based uh, asset analyst work and have an understanding of how the legal system works. So, yes, it is definitely more people intensive for us. Not as heavy as you would think, because, like I said, we don't need to do the legal part at the end. Once we hire a good local firm, they're going to run with it. We still work with them. Like if I go after your bank account, I may want to subpoena the stuff and we take a look at it to find out where your money came from. Maybe you got rentals nobody knows about, right? And we got to follow the money. So there's that. But yes, it is a little more people heavy, and we are training them to do the work because there's actually no real way to do this with a couple people. I could if I just worked very large cases, but the payoff curve isn't there. We
Hmm.
have to have larger ones. We have to have some moderate sized ones. We have to have some smaller ones, and smaller ones pay off faster, but they're smaller. The medium ones pay off, take more time, but the yield is great. And the large ones, which we call our lottery ones, um, pay off much more rarely, but they make the most amount. So it has to have the right mix, and we have to have the right people. So that's what we're doing. We are actually training, finding, recruiting, and training analysts and researchers to be able to do this. And yeah, it's messier. That's why I was saying it's messier than most other funds, but our yield is much higher than most other funds.
Hmm. So talking about your yield, just are you a 506B or a 506C before we continue?
I think it was a B,
You're a
but
B?
I can't quite remember. Remember, I'm on the analyst side. It's
Yeah, okay.
Yay and Warren that remember that, but I think it was a B. I kind of phase out when they start getting into all the terminology. All I want to do is buy great stuff and hunt people down and get them.
All right. So yeah, I was gonna go deeper into like your fun terms, but if you're not sure if it's a B or C, let's not do that. Um, but yeah, I mean, I think Warren talked a little bit about it. Like your win rate is like crazy, right? 80%, and you're
It is, yeah.
buying that on pennies on the dollar. So like
Right.
how much? Like five in average, like 5 to 10 pennies on the dollar. 5 to 10 cents on
I'd
the
say
dollar?
closer to 1 to 10 cents on the dollar, depending on how
1
big
to 10
the pool is.
cents on the dollar.
Yeah, yeah. But when yeah, it's, it can get but you gotta remember that when I'm buying at 1 cent or 2 cent or 3 cent, I'm buying a large pool of them, and I may not be able to control what's in there. So when we buy it, we know there's a certain amount of them are gonna make that let's say, for us, it's gotta have an 80% fail rate and still be able to double or triple the money, right? That's our minimum goal, is I have to look at that pool and say, if I lose 9 out of 8 out of 10, we're still gonna do very, very well. Because we're losing pennies, right? But we're recovering dollars, right?
Yeah.
Because we're not just getting the dollar for the judgment, we're also get the statutory interest that keeps accruing, right? So those things grow. It's like an involuntary loan, right? It just keeps growing and growing and growing.
Mhm. So we have talked a little bit about this on the podcast with your partner, but I didn't quite understand it, and you mentioned it as well. Pools of judgments. So who pulls the judgments together? Like what?
It's
How are
banks and
banks?
finance companies, right? So you have a say a bank that does business loans, and the banks have advantages where they get tax write-offs and stuff, and they'll only keep it for I think the minimum is 120 days, and they can sell it off and they get a tax write-off. And then they whatever difference they make at the end, they can get. That's why they don't work too hard at it, right? Uh, That's banks, but insurance companies have this problem. Their business is not post-judgment recovery, right? They will try to get the judgment, try to talk to the people, see what they can do to force an issue. But in the end, a lot of them have done the math and it's not worth their time, which
Hmm.
is why the insurance companies write them off on such a quick period of time. It's better for them to go find somebody else to lend money to make that high interest than it is to spend time doing the recovery and having to go through years of court and the attorney's cost.
Hmm.
So everybody plays the game the best way they can for them. For them, recovery is generally not worth it. For us, because they need to get rid of it, it works out perfect for us.
Yeah. So that brings me to the next logical question, which is, what is your competition? Is there a lot of people doing this? I mean, probably not, right? It's a pretty blue
Uh,
ocean. Uh,
no, there are some. I'm part of various groups of people who do this, right? But they tend to be smaller investors or smaller investigators that do it for a business. But I don't know. I think I only know one other investigator that's created a fund. His is more heavily related to real estate. Um, which is fine. I mean, ours is also is tied to some real estate, but to us that's a little too risky, right? So the beauty of our fund is it's inversely correlated to most other funds. If your real estate fund there's a correction in the market, your real estate fund goes down, our revenue goes up because there's more opportunity, right?
mhm.
So the other guy with the real estate, that's great. I hope the market doesn't correct enough where it affects him. With us, it won't. We'll actually make more money.
I mean, personal debt has never been. Personal debt is at a all-time high right now. Credit card debt is at a high. All of the general people are in debt right now, so it is indeed a great time for you.
It's a perfect storm, right? And that's why we determined that this time around, we were gonna be ready for it. So that when that perfect storm hits and there's I mean, theoretically, I'd love to buy $1 billion worth of Class A stuff, right? Um, I don't know if that'll ever happen, but I would love to be in a position that if it does happen, we could go in and bid because at that point, you're bidding serious money, 7, 8 figures, right? Um and for us, we have to have that money available. We have to have the proven track record. The track record we have, which is great. So going into this fund, we have years worth of recoveries and yields that we can show and prove. So I think whereas somebody else starting a fund, they may or may not have that proof yet. So we do have that advantage on that side. Our weakness right now is learning how to build a fund. Right. The good news is we got some really good people we're working with that are showing us how to do that and that didn't exist not too long ago,
Hmm.
but does exist now. So we're like, great. So our weakest point is now covered, and we're in a really good position.
All right. So now before we end the podcast, can you give some advice to people who want to be a private investigator, right? So people that want to go down the same path as you. You began by being a private investigator, repossessing cars. Right now, you're going after judgments with your own investment fund. So let's say someone who wants to go into that field, or who is already into that field but less experienced than you, what would be your biggest advice and your biggest advice?
That's a great question. I'd have to say, if I had to start over, if I was giving advice to my younger self, um, the best place to go is try to find a mentor. Okay, so part of the issue of being a private investigator is they're very small shops. They're very independent people, um, and it can be tough to get your foot into the door. But if you went to your state association, you just join your state PI association. There's most of the people, a lot of the people there have been in business for years, right? Most of them would be happy to give advice over a cup of coffee, right? And I'm kind of surprised. I will have two or three people a year. They'll take me out for coffee. My state association here. I'm a past president of the association, so I get a little more exposure. I'll have a couple of them take me out, and I will give them all the advice they want. And I tell a bunch of the other newbies, if you need anything, just let me know. We can take me out for the cost of a cup of coffee. I'll give you everything you need to know about financial investigations. And if it turns out you don't like that, let's say you prefer to be outside, you want to do surveillance, you want to do defense work, or whatever area you think you have a skill set or mindset for. Um, I'll introduce you to the people that do that. You take them out for a cup of coffee, and see if there's a connection, and maybe you can start working with them and get into their shop on an apprenticeship level. Trying to do it from scratch by yourself is hard because it's hard to figure out how to do the marketing, how to get the clients. Um, so that's I even though I've been independent since I was 18, there are 2 times during that career path where I stopped, went and worked for somebody else, filled in all the gaps of knowledge, worked for them for a year or 2, and then went back to my stuff. And I can tell you right now, I would not be where I am today if I had not worked and mentored under a couple of other people. So it's a highly independent world. The person you ask today to work with, who says no because they only have a couple of people in their staff, soon as one of them quits because they're going to have a kid or they get another job opportunity, that door opens and you'd be surprised what shops you can get into. But if you don't have that relationship there in advance, um, already built in advance, if they don't know you, it's harder to do. But today there's so much more books out, training, online training for, believe it or not, there's online training schools for PIs that train all types of topics, and podcasts and interviews and stuff. So much easier today to find that specialty, and be able to get it. When I was a kid, I had a bunch of old guys. Most of them were retired police chiefs. It was much harder to find that right person.
Hmm. So then, if people wanted to contact you concerning, learning about private investigating and getting you as a mentor, or see more about your investment fund, if they're curious, how should they contact you?
Rod at acornfundinggroup.com. And yes, it does have two G's at the end with the funding group. Um, if you want to talk about, if you think you get the mindset to be an analyst or a court researcher or an investor that wants more information, be happy to talk to you about that. I mean, it's my area, my world. So you're going to hear more on the investigating side, because that's what I am and that's what I do. But I love what I do. It's the funnest job I've ever had.
And that's where you want to be, right? You want to be in a lucrative space that you love it, and it's the funnest job you ever had, like you said. So it's great that you found your passion, and right now you're gonna make money with it, in a lucratize it with a in a massive way with an investment fund. And I met Warren. I mean, he's a great partner. He seems like an amazing money raiser, an amazing salesman. If An amazing salesman. If you guys want to listen to the podcast, it's called How to Build Wealth by Buying Debt. I think it was my fourth podcast, and it was really interesting as well. We dove deeper into their investment fund. And yeah, as far as I'm concerned, as far as I know, you have a great team, and
Yeah, we
it's really
do.
interesting because I'm in that alternative investment as well because I'm uncorrelated to the market, but you're like totally uncorrelated to anything at all, right? You don't even react to news. I mean, people are in debt. Perfect. I have more deals. If people are not in debt, you'll still have it like decent deal flow, and you'll be able to make good returns. So I think it's a very interesting, and it's also really, really blue ocean, right? Honestly, if I'm being totally honest, I had no idea this kind of thing existed before I met you guys, and I think most people do, right? So if you're a lawyer, you probably know this feel a little bit, but most people don't even think about this, and it's crazy. It's a really really blue ocean. It's amazing that you guys find this and are now not only helping people to get cents on the dollar on their debt. Maybe it's not the best thing; they're not getting their judgments paid fully, but at least they're getting something instead of nothing, right? Because they would never be able to do what you do, and if they were, they're probably gonna spend money with lawyers and like you said, debt collectors that are not experienced, and then just end up losing money and not getting paid at all their debt. So at least now they're getting paid pennies on the dollars, and then you're helping investor get access to, like I said, a really blue ocean thesis.
You'd be surprised at how many people they need the event. They need to sell it, right? And it's not about the money. It's been taking up a lot of rent in their head because this person ripped them off. And then they put real cash in to go after them, real time. There's anger, frustration, disappointment involved. And for them to be able to close that chapter and say, I'm going to get some cash for this judgment, but I know you're going after them, right? And that somebody, and they would tell us, I've had a lot of people tell us, I just want to know that they know that they didn't get away with it. So
Mm.
and they can close that chapter that's been open for so long. So believe it or not, that is actually a big part of when we're doing the one-off purchases.
Hmm. Yeah, like you said, there's a it's a mental game as well. It's when there's money involved, it start getting emotional, and it's I can relate to people giving up on the money, but that wants the people that stole them to not get away with it.
I actually met a guy. I was sitting in first class. My wife was a flight attendant for a while because she wanted to do something different, and I would be able to score these first class tickets once in a while. And it's like half the time I was up first class, half the time I was in the back. But I sat next to this very high level executive, and we had this great conversation. He told me out in his garage was a stack of judgments that he had. He kept thinking every time he moved, he would move, and the stack would come with him. And it just frustrated him. And he goes, "I would love for you to take a look at these things." Because it's always in the back of my mind, the anger, and the justice that I want. So I said, "Great, you get back. Here's my email. Scan them, send them over. I'll take a look at every one of them." He went out in the garage. He took a look at them. He had found out that every single one of them had expired years ago. And but all that time, it had taken up his mental energy. And I said, "I'm sorry to hear that, but I'm glad you found out that this stack of stuff that you've been carrying, you no longer have to carry that weight with you anymore. You could actually get rid of that thing."
Yeah. So you're helping people on both sides to make money with your fund and to get rid of unpayable judgments. So anyway, we've the 60 minute passed really quickly. But it was great having you as a guest. It was great talking to you. Uh, I learned about a field that I would have never heard about. It's really private investigating. I didn't even know. I knew nothing about it. So it was great learning from you. And yeah, if people want to contact you, I'll put your email in the description. And thanks for coming in.
Sure. Maybe next year we could do a anniversary interview to
Yeah,
show
for
you
sure.
what happened after a year and tell you some new stories.
That would be great, man. All right. Thank you everybody for listening, and take care.
Yeah, thanks.